The sound of security badges beeping was my alarm clock for 7 years. Every morning at precisely 8:15, I'd walk through the steel-reinforced doors of Nexus Solutions, a government contractor that nobody outside of certain classified circles had ever heard of. But on that particular Tuesday in October, I didn't realize I was walking into the last day of my career there, or that I'd be leaving with information that would make the most powerful man in our department wish he'd never crossed me. I should have known something was wrong when Thomas Vaughn, my boss of 5 years, couldn't look me in the eyes during our morning briefing. Thomas had always been a difficult man to work for, demanding, critical, and protective of his position, but he'd never been a coward until that day. "Adrian, I need you to take a look at something weird in the DoD portal integration," he said, sliding a folder across the conference table toward me. The security audit flagged some anomalies in the authentication protocols, probably nothing, but we need to document it for compliance. I nodded, taking the folder. As lead security architect for Nexus, unusual system behavior was my domain. I'd built most of our security infrastructure from the ground up, spending countless nights ensuring that the government systems we supported were impenetrable. My work was my identity. My colleagues often joked that I cared more about our security protocols than my own personal life. They weren't entirely wrong. "I'll check it out," I replied, not yet understanding that Thomas was feeding me just enough rope to hang myself. Back at my desk, I dug into the logs. At first, everything seemed routine, the usual traffic patterns, authentication requests, session management, but 3 hours in, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden within the standard authentication flow was a subtle backdoor, an elegant, nearly invisible access point that would allow someone with the right credentials to bypass every security measure and access classified government data without leaving a trace. This wasn't a bug. This was intentional. I dug deeper, following the digital breadcrumbs. The code was sophisticated, professional, not the work of some random hacker. And then I found the signature. A specific coding style I recognized immediately because I'd reviewed it hundreds of times before. Thomas Vaughn. My boss had implemented backdoors into government systems. And not just any systems. Databases containing sensitive information on military personnel, procurement contracts, and infrastructure vulnerabilities. My heart pounded as I stared at my screen. Was this treason, espionage, or just Thomas giving himself a failsafe for emergencies? Whatever his reasons, this was a major security breach that needed to be reported immediately. I should have been more careful. I should have copied the evidence first. I should have seen the trap. Instead, I walked straight to Thomas's office and closed the door behind me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I found something in the authentication protocols." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And what did you find, Adrian?" "Backdoors, intentionally placed, using your coding signature." A long silence stretched between us. Then Thomas sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice that," he said finally. "Most people wouldn't have—" "Why?" I asked, the single word carrying the weight of my confusion and betrayal. "It's complicated," Thomas replied, reaching for his phone. "Some things are bigger than company policy or even government regulations. Sometimes you need insurance." "Insurance against what? This compromises national security." Thomas. He punched a number into his phone. "I need security in my office. Now." Then he looked back at me, something almost like regret crossing his face. "I'm sorry it came to this, Adrian. You're brilliant, one of the best I've ever worked with, but you're also a liability now." The next hour passed in a blur. Security escorting me to my desk to collect my personal items. HR explaining that I was being terminated for attempting to implement unauthorized backdoors into secured systems. Thomas standing silently in the background as I was handed termination papers that accused me of the very thing he had done. I was being framed, and the setup was perfect. As the whistleblower, I was now the scapegoat. "You won't get away with this," I told Thomas as security walked me to the exit. He smiled thinly. "I already have. Who would believe you now?" That night, sitting in my apartment surrounded by empty takeout containers, I realized Thomas was right. I had no proof. My security clearance was revoked. My reputation was ruined. No government contractor would touch me now. 7 years of my life had been erased in an afternoon. But Thomas had made one critical mistake. He assumed I would give up. He didn't know that I had made my own insurance policy years ago. Every night for the past 7 years, I had backed up my work. Not the classified information. I wasn't stupid or treasonous, but my own code, my own systems, my own trails through the digital landscape we had built. It was my personal record of my professional achievements, stored on encrypted drives in a safe in my apartment. And somewhere in those backups was evidence of exactly when and how Thomas had implemented his backdoors. Game on, Thomas, I whispered to my empty apartment as I fired up my personal laptop. Game on. The next 6 months were the darkest of my life. Finding work was impossible with my record. My savings dwindled. My few friends from Nexus stopped returning my calls. Associating with me had become professional suicide. I survived on freelance coding gigs that paid a fraction of what I was worth. But every night, I worked on my revenge, methodically combing through years of backups, documenting every instance where Thomas had manipulated the systems, building an airtight case that proved not only his guilt, but my innocence. It wasn't easy. Thomas had been careful, implementing his changes gradually over years, but he hadn't counted on my obsessive attention to detail or my perfect memory for code. Slowly, meticulously, I reconstructed the timeline of his betrayal. Then I found something unexpected. Thomas wasn't working alone. In email fragments and meeting notes, I discovered communications between Thomas and someone named Midas. The exchanges were careful, coded, but clear enough to someone who knew what to look for. Thomas was selling access. The backdoors weren't for insurance, they were for profit. I needed more evidence, but I had hit a wall. I couldn't access Nexus systems anymore. Then fate handed me an unexpected gift. Samantha Lynn, a junior developer from Nexus, reached out to me through an anonymous messaging app. I know you didn't do what they said. Her message read, "Things are weird here since you left. Thomas is acting paranoid. Systems are changing. I want to help." I was suspicious at first, worried this was Thomas trying to entrap me further. But after careful vetting, I became convinced Samantha was genuine. She was young, idealistic, and smart enough to realize something was deeply wrong at Nexus. "I need access to the current system logs," I told her during our first face-to-face meeting at a crowded cafe far from Nexus headquarters. Just enough to compare against my historical data. Samantha looked nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "That's risky. Thomas has implemented new security measures. He's watching everything." "He's covering his tracks," I explained, "which means he's worried." "What exactly do you think he's doing?" she asked. I chose my words carefully. "I believe he's selling access to classified systems, but I need proof." Samantha agreed to help, but insisted we proceed cautiously. Over the next few weeks, she became my eyes and ears inside Nexus, providing carefully extracted logs and updates on Thomas's increasingly erratic behavior. He's doing system-wide security upgrades himself, off hours. She reported one night, locking everyone else out while he works. "He's cleaning house," I said. "He knows there might be evidence of his activities." "But why now? You've been gone for months." I had been wondering the same thing. Then another piece of the puzzle fell into place when I spotted a news item about a major government contract being awarded to Nexus, the largest in the company's history. They would be implementing security protocols for a unified database across multiple agencies. Thomas was about to get access to even more sensitive systems. The potential value of his backdoors had just multiplied exponentially. With Samantha's help, I continued building my case. She took enormous risks, staying late to access secured terminals, copying logs, even photographing Thomas's calendar. Each piece of evidence strengthened my position. But I knew accusations against someone as connected as Thomas would need to be irrefutable. Then, 3 months into our collaboration, Samantha sent me an urgent message. "Thomas knows. Someone saw me accessing his schedule. I'm being called to HR tomorrow morning." My stomach dropped. Samantha's career, possibly her freedom, was now in jeopardy because of me. "Don't go in," I told her. "Call in sick. We need to meet." That night, at a 24-hour diner, Samantha looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe in what we're doing, but I'm terrified. Thomas has connections everywhere. If he can destroy your career, what will he do to mine?" She was right. I had dragged her into my personal vendetta, and now she was paying the price. "You've done enough," I told her, sliding a flash drive across the table. "This contains everything we've gathered so far, plus detailed documentation explaining your involvement. If anything happens to either of us, send it to this address." I handed her a slip of paper with the contact information for a journalist I trusted. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "End this," I replied, "one way or another." That night, reviewing everything we had gathered, I realized we had enough, not just to expose Thomas's backdoors, but to prove he was selling access to someone. The only missing piece was the identity of Midas and concrete proof of payment. I needed one more piece of evidence, and I knew exactly where it would be. Thomas's personal laptop, the one he never let out of his sight at work, the one he took home every night. What I was considering wasn't just crossing a line, it was leaping over it. Breaking and entering, computer fraud. Possibly worse, if caught. I wouldn't just lose my career, I'd go to prison. But Thomas had already taken everything from me, and if I didn't stop him, his backdoors could compromise national security on an unprecedented scale. The decision made itself. Thomas lived in an upscale condo in the city. Security was good, but not impenetrable. After a week of surveillance, I knew his routine. Every Thursday night, he played racquetball at his exclusive club, followed by drinks with the same group of executives. He never got home before midnight. The next Thursday, dressed in nondescript clothing and carrying a backpack with carefully selected tools. I waited in the parking garage beneath his building. When a resident drove in, I walked in behind their car before the gate closed. Just another tenant returning home. Getting into the building was the easy part. Thomas's door was another matter. I had prepared for a standard lock, but discovered he had upgraded to a digital system. For a moment, I thought my plan had failed before it began. Then I remembered something from my time at Nexus. Thomas always used variations of the same password structure for everything, a particular formula that he thought made his passwords unbreakable. I had noticed it when he had once been forced to share admin credentials with me during an emergency system update. After 3 tense attempts, the lock clicked open. I was in. Thomas's condo was minimalist and impersonal, more like a hotel suite than a home. I found his laptop in his home office, connected to a docking station. My hands trembled slightly as I woke the machine. As expected, it required a password. I tried the same formula I'd used on the door, with slight variations. On the 4th attempt, the screen unlocked. Working quickly, I connected an encrypted drive and began copying files. I didn't have time to search thoroughly, so I grabbed everything: emails, documents, financial records. I would sort through it all later. 20 minutes in, my phone vibrated. The alert I had set up to monitor the garage entrance. Thomas was back early. Panic surged through me as I watched the copy progress, 89% complete. I couldn't stop now. 93%, 95%. I heard the elevator ding down the hall. 98%, 90%. Keys jingling outside the door. 100%. I disconnected the drive, shut down the laptop, and slipped into the guest bathroom just as the front door opened. Pressed against the wall, barely breathing, I heard Thomas moving around the condo. He entered the office. Silence. Had he noticed something out of place? After what seemed like an eternity, I heard the shower start in the master bathroom. My chance. I slipped out of the guest bathroom, through the living room, and out the front door, closing it silently behind me. I didn't breathe normally again until I was 5 blocks away, my precious drive secure in my pocket. Back in my apartment, I spent the entire night combing through Thomas's files. Most were useless. Work documents, personal emails, tax records. But then I found a folder labeled simply Consulting. Inside were encrypted communications with someone using the Midas handle, and payment records, substantial offshore transfers coinciding exactly with the dates of major system changes at Nexus. Thomas wasn't just selling access, he was making millions doing it. But the real shock came when I finally uncovered Midas's identity through references in the communications. Not a foreign agent or criminal organization, as I had assumed. Midas was Bradford Miller, the deputy director of the very government agency that had awarded Nexus its contracts. This wasn't just corruption. This was a high-level government official deliberately creating vulnerabilities in systems he was paid to protect. I had what I needed, more than I had expected. The question now was how to use it. Going to the authorities was risky. I didn't know how far Miller's influence reached or who else might be involved. The press was an option. But whistleblowers didn't always fare well, especially when accusing powerful figures. I decided on a two-pronged approach. First, confront Thomas directly with what I knew, offering him a chance to come clean in exchange for clearing my name. If he refused, I would send everything to multiple journalists and federal investigators simultaneously, making it too public to bury. I sent Thomas a text from a burner phone. "We need to talk about Midas. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Park by the boathouse. Come alone or everything goes public." He responded within minutes. "Who is this?" I didn't answer. He would figure it out. The next day was cold and overcast. The park nearly empty. I arrived an hour early, scouting the area for any sign that Thomas had brought backup. At exactly 2 p.m., I saw him approach, alone as instructed, wearing an expensive overcoat and an expression of controlled rage. He spotted me sitting on a bench and froze momentarily before walking over. "You," he said, remaining standing. "I should have known." "Sit down, Thomas," I replied calmly. "You'll want to be sitting for this conversation. If you think you can blackmail me—" "Sit down." Something in my voice must have convinced him. He sat, leaving as much space between us as the bench allowed. "How did you get my number?" he asked. "The same way I got everything else. You underestimated me." "What exactly do you think you know?" I turned to face him fully. "I know about the backdoors. I know about Bradford Miller. I know about the offshore accounts. I have dates, times, amounts. I have your encrypted communications. I have everything. Thomas." The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might be ill. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You made two mistakes," I continued. "First, you assumed I wouldn't keep personal backups of my work. Second, you thought I'd give up after you destroyed my career." Thomas stared out at the water, his mind visibly racing. "What do you want?" "I want my name cleared. A formal statement from Nexus acknowledging I was wrongfully terminated. And I want you and Miller to turn yourselves in." He laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You're insane. Do you have any idea who you're threatening? Miller has connections at every level of government." "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm offering you a chance to do the right thing with some dignity intact. Otherwise, by this time tomorrow, every major news outlet and the FBI will have copies of everything I found." "You'd never be able to prove where you got the information," Thomas said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Breaking into my home, hacking my computer. You'd be admitting to multiple felonies." "Maybe," I conceded, "but I've already lost everything. So what about you? What happens to Thomas Vaughn, respected government contractor, when all this becomes public? When Miller realizes you've become a liability?" Thomas was silent for a long moment. "I need time to think. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow. After that, it all goes public." I stood to leave, but Thomas grabbed my arm. "Wait," he said, his voice strained. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Miller isn't just some corrupt official. He has people who handle problems for him. Permanently. Are you threatening me now?" "I'm warning you," he insisted. "This is bigger than both of us." I pulled my arm free. 9 a.m. Thomas, your choice. That night, I took precautions. I uploaded encrypted copies of all my evidence to cloud storage with instructions for automatic release if I didn't enter a code every 12 hours. I sent sealed envelopes with USB drives to 2 journalists with notes to open them if they didn't hear from me by the deadline. Then I waited, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound outside my apartment. At 7:13 a.m., my phone rang. "We need to meet," Thomas said, his voice tense. "Not in public." That's not happening. Please, he said, and the desperation in that single word caught me off guard. Miller knows, I don't know how, but he knows he's sending someone to your apartment right now. If this is some kind of trick, for God's sake, Adrian, get out of there. Go to 1120 Westlake Avenue, apartment 507. The door will be unlocked. I'll meet you there at noon. The line went dead. I stood frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. Was this a trap? Or was Thomas actually trying to help me? Either way, staying put suddenly seemed like a bad idea. I grabbed my go bag, already packed with essentials, my laptop, and copies of the evidence, and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that stopped right at my door. There was a second exit through my bedroom window that led to the fire escape. I didn't hesitate. As I climbed down the metal stairs as quietly as possible, I heard the distinct sound of my front door being forced open above me. Thomas hadn't been lying. I spent the next few hours moving through the city, taking random buses and subways, watching for any sign of being followed. By 11:30, I was standing across the street from 1120 Westlake Avenue, studying the building. It was an older apartment complex, nice but not luxury, nothing obviously suspicious. At 11:55, I entered the building behind a resident and took the elevator to the 5th floor. Apartment 507 was at the end of the hall. As promised, the door was unlocked. The apartment was sparsely furnished, but clean. No personal items visible. A safe house of some kind. I did a quick sweep. No one hiding, no obvious surveillance equipment. At exactly noon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it cautiously to find Thomas, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "You made it," he said, stepping inside and immediately locking the door behind him. "Good. What's going on, Thomas? How does Miller know?" Thomas moved to the window, peering through the blinds before turning back to me. "Miller has surveillance on me. Has for years. It's part of our arrangement. He must have spotted you at my condo or seen our meeting in the park. And you led him right to my apartment." "I didn't have a choice," Thomas snapped. "You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under, what kind of threats—" "Save it," I said coldly. "You chose to sell out your country for money. No one forced you to create those backdoors." Thomas sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking older than his years. "It didn't start that way. The first backdoor was just for emergency access, standard practice for really. But then Miller approached me, said he knew what I had done, offered me a choice, work with him or go to prison. So you just happened to create an unauthorized backdoor, and Miller just happened to find out about it. That's quite a coincidence." Thomas looked away. It wasn't a coincidence. The original backdoor was Miller's idea. He approached me years ago, said it was for a classified program, showed me documentation that seemed legitimate. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was already implicated. And the millions in your offshore accounts came later. Once Miller knew he had me, the demands kept growing. More access, more systems. The money was compensation and insurance that I had as much to lose as he did. It was a convenient story, too convenient, but something in Thomas's defeated posture made me think there might be at least some truth to it. "So what now?" I asked. "Why are we here?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I want out. I've wanted out for years, but there's never been a way. Until you, with your evidence, maybe... You want to make a deal?" He nodded. "I'll testify against Miller. Tell the authorities everything. In exchange for leniency..." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, and clearing my name. "Of course, that's part of it. You were right all along. Adrian, I'll make that official." It sounded too good to be true. After months of planning my revenge, Thomas was suddenly offering me everything I wanted. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "Or it's after everything you've done?" Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "Because of this. It's everything I have on Miller. Bank records, communications, details of every system he's compromised, things even you don't know about." He set it on the coffee table between us. "Consider it a good faith gesture." I picked up the drive, turning it over in my hand. "If this is legitimate, why not go to the authorities yourself?" Because no one would believe me without corroboration. Your evidence proves I'm not just trying to save myself by inventing stories about Miller. He leaned forward. We need each other. Adrian. I pocketed the drive. I'll need to verify this information. Of course, there's a laptop in the bedroom you can use, but we need to move quickly. Miller's people are looking for both of us now. As Thomas spoke, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. What is it? I asked. Miller. He wants to meet. Says he has a proposition for me. Thomas looked up, his eyes calculating. This could be useful. If I can get him talking, get him to incriminate himself. It's too risky, I argued. He could be planning to eliminate you as a liability. Possibly, but he'll be expecting me to beg for mercy, to offer to help find you. He won't be expecting me to be wearing a wire. The plan came together quickly. Thomas would meet Miller at an upscale restaurant downtown, public enough to reduce the risk of immediate violence, private enough for conversation. I would be nearby, recording everything through a Bluetooth connection to the microphone Thomas would wear. If anything goes wrong, Thomas said as he prepared to leave, release everything immediately. Don't wait for the deadline. And if it goes right? He almost smiled. Then we both get what we want. I spent the next hour in the apartment, verifying the information on Thomas's flash drive. It was legitimate, and even more damning than what I had already uncovered. Miller hadn't just been selling access to domestic systems, he had compromised international networks as well. The potential damage was staggering. At 7 p.m., Thomas entered the restaurant. Through the earpiece, I could hear him being greeted by the maitre d', then guided to a private dining room. Thomas, came a new voice, smooth, cultured, confident. Bradford Miller. I appreciate you coming on such short notice. You didn't give me much choice, Thomas replied, his voice remarkably steady. Choices are luxuries neither of us can afford at the moment, Miller said. I heard ice clinking in a glass. Drink? No, thank you. You seem tense. That's understandable, given the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? Thomas asked carefully. Miller chuckled. Let's not play games. Your former employee, Adrian Mercer, he's become quite troublesome, hasn't he? Hearing my name from Miller's mouth sent a chill through me. I fired Mercer months ago, Thomas said. His accusations were baseless. Were they? Because my sources tell me he's been gathering evidence. Evidence that could be problematic for both of us. What sources? That's not important, Miller dismissed. What's important is that he needs to be dealt with, permanently. There was a pause. You can't be serious, Thomas finally said. I'm always serious when it comes to protecting our interests. This arrangement has been profitable for both of us. Thomas, I'd hate to see it end because of one disgruntled employee. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about national security, Miller corrected smoothly. About preventing a leak that could compromise critical systems. The fact that it solves our personal problem is merely convenient. I didn't sign up for this, Thomas protested. You signed up the moment you implemented that first backdoor, Miller said, his voice hardening. You're in this as deep as I am. The only question is whether you'll continue to enjoy the benefits or suffer the consequences. The conversation continued, with Miller outlining a plan to handle me and dispose of any evidence. Thomas played his part perfectly, initially resistant but gradually appearing to be convinced. And if I help you with this, Thomas asked finally, what guarantee do I have that I won't be next on your list? Miller laughed. Thomas, if I wanted you eliminated, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You're valuable to me, your expertise, your access. As long as you remain useful and discreet, our arrangement continues. It's that simple. And what about Adrian's claims? If he's sent evidence to others, we'll deal with that if it becomes necessary. My position allows me certain abilities to contain situations. Now, do we have an understanding? Yes, Thomas said after a pause. We do. Excellent. I'll have my associate contact you tomorrow with details. The meeting concluded shortly after, with promises of further communication. When Thomas returned to the apartment an hour later, his face was flushed with a mix of fear and triumph. We got him, he said, removing the concealed microphone. Clear admission of the backdoors, the payments, and now conspiracy to commit murder. It's more than enough. I nodded, already preparing copies of the recording to add to our evidence. So what's the next step? We take everything to the FBI, but not locally. We can't risk Miller having influence there. There's a field office in Seattle where I have a contact. Someone I trust. We'll fly there tomorrow morning. You have tickets? Thomas nodded. Under aliases, Miller will be expecting me to contact him tomorrow about finding you. That gives us time to get out of the city. The plan made sense, but something still bothered me. Why are you doing this, Thomas? Really? You could have denied everything, claimed I fabricated the evidence. He was quiet for a moment. Because you were right about me. I did lose my way. Started with small compromises that led to bigger ones. Miller's planning something major, something beyond what you've discovered. I don't know exactly what, but it involves the new integrated systems Nexus is implementing. Whatever it is, I can't have that on my conscience. Whether I fully believed him didn't matter. We needed each other, at least until Miller was exposed. Get some rest, Thomas said. Our flight leaves at 6 a.m. I slept fitfully that night, my mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. By 4 a.m., we were both awake and preparing to leave. Thomas seemed particularly on edge, checking his phone frequently. Problem? I asked as he frowned at the screen. Miller's associate was supposed to contact me by now about, maybe he's being cautious, using secure channels. Maybe. Thomas didn't sound convinced. We should go. Car will be here in 15 minutes. As we gathered our things, Thomas's phone buzzed again. He read the message, his face draining of color. What is it? I asked, instantly alert. It's from a number I don't recognize. Just 2 words, deal canceled. We stared at each other, the implication clear. Miller had discovered Thomas's betrayal. We need to move, now. I grabbed my bag. Thomas nodded, heading for the door. He opened it and froze. Standing in the hallway was a man in a dark suit, his hand inside his jacket in a way that left little doubt about what he was reaching for. Mr. Vaughn, the man said calmly. Mr. Miller would like another word. Thomas slammed the door shut and locked it. Back door, he shouted, already running toward the bedroom. I was right behind him as we heard the front door being kicked. The bedroom window led to a fire escape, just like at my apartment. We climbed out just as the man entered the bedroom. Stop or I'll shoot, he called after us. We didn't stop. The next few hours were a blur of evasion, ditching our phones, separating briefly to confuse any pursuit, using cash only. Meeting up at a predetermined location, a storage facility where Thomas kept emergency supplies under a false name. Miller has resources we can't match, Thomas said as we huddled in the small storage unit. Government resources. We need to disappear until we can get the evidence to the right people. I have the dead man switch set up, I reminded him. If I don't reset it by noon, everything goes public anyway. Thomas checked his watch. That's 3 hours from now. We need a secure way to contact your FBI friend in Seattle. Not on any device that can be traced to us, I said. We need a clean laptop and a secure connection. I know a place. Thomas led me to a small internet cafe in a part of town neither of us frequented. We paid cash, took stations at opposite ends of the room, and worked quickly. I set up secure email accounts while Thomas reached out to his FBI contact through an encrypted messaging platform he assured me was untraceable. He's responded, Thomas said when we met outside 30 minutes later. Says to bring everything we have to the Seattle office tomorrow morning. He'll meet us personally. Can we trust him? More than anyone else right now. We found a budget motel on the outskirts of the city, again paying cash and using false names, as an extra precaution. I reset my dead man switch to give us 24 more hours before automatic release of the evidence. Tomorrow this will all be over, Thomas said as we settled into the cramped room. One way or another. If we make it to tomorrow, I replied. We will. He sounded more confident than either of us felt. That night, taking turns keeping watch, we finalized our approach, how we would present the evidence, what we would ask for in return for our cooperation, the narrative we would construct about Thomas's involvement to maximize his chances for leniency. Morning came without incident. We checked out early, took a circuitous route to the airport, and approached the security checkpoint separately. I went first, heart pounding as I presented my fake ID. The TSA agent barely glanced at it, waving me through. I waited at the gate, scanning constantly for any sign of Miller's people. 10 minutes before boarding, Thomas still hadn't appeared. My anxiety grew with each passing minute. Had he been caught? Decided to run? Betrayed me again? Just as they announced the start of boarding, I spotted him hurrying toward the gate, looking relieved when he saw me. Problem with the ID scanner, he explained as he reached me. For a minute there, I thought, me too, I admitted. We boarded without further issues, both of us visibly relaxing only when the plane lifted off the runway. Seattle, here we come, Thomas murmured beside me. The flight was uneventful. In Seattle, we rented a car and drove directly to the FBI field office. Thomas's contact, Special Agent Callahan, met us in the lobby. A serious-looking man with graying temples and watchful eyes. Mr. Vaughn, he greeted Thomas with a handshake. And you must be Mr. Mercer. Let's talk somewhere private. He led us to a conference room where two other agents waited. After introductions and preliminary statements, we presented our evidence, the backdoor documentation, the financial records, the recording of Miller explicitly discussing both the compromised systems and his plans to have me killed. The agents' expressions grew increasingly grave as they reviewed the material. This is substantial, Agent Callahan said finally. If verified, it represents one of the most significant security breaches in recent history. We'll need to move quickly. Over the next several hours, we gave detailed statements, answered countless questions, and turned over all physical evidence. I watched Thomas carefully during this process, still not entirely trusting his motives, but he appeared to be holding nothing back. We'll need you both to remain in Seattle for the time being, Agent Callahan informed us as the interviews concluded. We've arranged secure accommodations, given the nature of the threat against you, Mr. Mercer, and potentially against Mr. Vaughn now as well. Protective custody is advisable. We were escorted to a nondescript hotel where additional agents were stationed in adjoining rooms. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of carrying this information alone had been crushing. What happens now? I asked Thomas as we sat in the hotel room that evening. Both of us exhausted from the day's intensity. They build their case, verify our evidence, get warrants. Miller will be arrested, along with anyone else they can connect to this. He rubbed his eyes wearily. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they do turn. And Nexus, the Backdoors. Emergency teams will be deployed to identify and close every vulnerability. It'll be a massive operation. He looked at me with something like respect. You did it, Adrian. You stopped something that could have been catastrophic. We did it, I corrected, surprised by my own generosity. Whatever your initial motives, you came through in the end. Thomas smiled thinly. Redemption arc? Something like that. For 3 days, we remained in protective custody, occasionally called in for additional questioning as the FBI built their case. On the fourth morning, Agent Callahan arrived at our hotel with news. We're moving on Miller today, he informed us. Simultaneous operations in multiple cities. We've identified several accomplices, including 2 more within your former company. Anyone I know? Thomas asked. That's still classified, Callahan replied. But I can tell you we've secured the cooperation of Samantha Lynn. Her testimony corroborates much of what you've told us. I felt a surge of relief that Samantha was safe and had chosen to help the investigation. What about my name? I asked. My professional reputation? Once the arrests are made public, we'll issue a statement clearing you of any wrongdoing. Nexus will be required to do the same as part of their cooperation agreement. It was what I had wanted all along, yet somehow it felt hollow. My career, my life, had still been derailed. Months of my life lost to fear and obsession with revenge. It's not enough, I said quietly. Callahan studied me. No, it's not, but it's a start, and there will be civil remedies available to you once the criminal case concludes. He left shortly after, promising updates as the operation progressed. You should feel vindicated, Thomas said when we were alone again. I thought I would, I admitted. But mostly I just feel tired. Revenge is exhausting business. Is that what this was? Revenge? Thomas considered the question. It started that way, didn't it? You wanted to clear your name, but you also wanted to make me pay for what I did to you. I couldn't deny it. And now? Now it's about something bigger than either of us. Stopping Miller, protecting national security, maybe finding some redemption along the way. Hours later, Callahan returned with the news. Bradford Miller had been arrested, along with 4 accomplices. The operation had been successful, with all targets taken into custody without incident. The first phase of securing the compromised systems was underway. There's more, Callahan added. Miller's been talking, trying to cut a deal. He's implicated several foreign entities who paid for access through the Backdoors. This has become an international counterintelligence operation. The scale of what we had uncovered was still expanding. What had begun as my personal quest for justice had unraveled a conspiracy that threatened national security at the highest levels. 2 days later, the story broke in the national media. The headlines were sensational. Deputy Director arrested in massive security breach. Government systems compromised. Whistleblower vindicated after false termination. That last one gave me a particular satisfaction, though I noted they didn't mention me by name, just a former security architect at Nexus Solutions. Still, it was something. Thomas and I watched the coverage together in our hotel room, still under protective custody until the immediate threat assessment was complete. They're calling you a hero, Thomas observed as a news analyst praised the unnamed whistleblower who had exposed the conspiracy. They don't know the whole story. No one ever does. He muted the television and turned to face me. For what it's worth, I am sorry for what I did to you. It was wrong. Cowardly. Coming from Thomas, this was unprecedented. In all our years working together, I had never heard him apologize for anything. Why did you really help me? I asked. The truth this time. He was quiet for a long moment. When Miller started talking about having you killed, something snapped. I'd done a lot of things I'm not proud of, but that was a line I couldn't cross. And once I made that decision, I realized I was tired of being owned by Miller, tired of the constant fear of exposure. You gave me a way out. It was probably the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Whether it was enough to forgive what he'd done, I wasn't sure, but it was a start. A week after the arrests, we were finally released from protective custody. The immediate threat was deemed contained, though we were both given panic buttons and regular check-in protocols as a precaution. My first act as a free man was to visit Samantha, who had also been under protection during the operation. We met at a quiet cafe near the FBI field office. You look better, she said as we sat down with our coffees. Less haunted. I feel better. Thanks to you, in large part. You took enormous risks to help me. She shrugged. I did what was right. Besides, working for Thomas after you left was a nightmare. He became increasingly paranoid, controlling. When I realized what was really happening, I couldn't be part of it. What will you do now? The FBI has offered me a consulting position to help with the system recovery. After that, who knows? Nexus won't be the same after this. No, it won't, I agreed. Nexus Solutions was in turmoil. With multiple executives under investigation and their government contracts under review, the company's future was uncertain at best. A corporate restructuring was inevitable, with talk of the board bringing in outside leadership to clean house. As for me, job offers began arriving within days of the story breaking. Security firms, tech companies, even government agencies, all eager to hire the whistleblower who had exposed a major security breach. My professional exile was decisively over. But I wasn't ready to jump into anything new. The past year had changed me in ways I was still processing. The single-minded focus on revenge, the risks I had taken, the lines I had crossed. I needed time to reconcile who I had been with who I had become. 1 month after Miller's arrest, I received a call from Agent Callahan. The grand jury has returned indictments, he informed me. Miller, 3 of his associates, and Thomas Vaughn are all facing multiple federal charges. Thomas? I was surprised. I thought he was cooperating. He is, but the U.S. attorney couldn't ignore his role. The cooperation agreement will likely result in a reduced sentence, but there will be consequences. I felt strangely conflicted. Part of me, the part that had driven my months-long quest for revenge, was satisfied to hear Thomas would face justice. But another part recognized his essential role in bringing down Miller's operation. "There's something else," Callahan continued. "Thomas has asked to see you. Said there's unfinished business between you two." I agreed to the meeting, curious about what Thomas might consider unfinished business. We met in a conference room at the FBI office, Thomas now officially in custody, awaiting trial. He looked diminished somehow. The confident executive replaced by a man facing an uncertain future. "Thank you for coming," he said as we sat across from each other. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. "What's this about Thomas?" He slid a folder across the table. "This arrived yesterday from my attorney. Nexus is offering you a settlement. Full reinstatement of your professional reputation, back pay for the months since your termination, plus substantial damages." I opened the folder. The figure at the bottom of the page made my eyes widen. "This is generous. It's what you deserve," Thomas said simply. "The board is desperate to salvage the company's reputation. Making things right with you is part of that strategy. And you're delivering this why? Because I wanted you to hear it from me. My testimony was very specific about your role, Adrian. How you identified the backdoors, how I framed you to protect myself and Miller, how you pursued the truth at great personal risk. The settlement is as much about my actions as the company's." I studied the documents, turning the pages slowly. "What about you? What does your future look like?" "Prison, most likely. Even with the cooperation agreement, the charges are serious, but my attorney thinks we can get it down to 3 to 5 years with the right plea deal." He attempted a smile. Time to reflect on my poor life choices. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. I never wanted this, you know. When I found those back doors, all I wanted was to fix the security vulnerability. If you had worked with me instead of against me, we might both still be at Nexus, blissfully advancing our careers. Thomas shook his head. "Maybe. Or maybe Miller would have eliminated both of us when we became inconvenient. We'll never know." He wasn't wrong. The path we had taken, for all its hardship, had exposed a conspiracy that might otherwise have continued unchecked. "I'm going to accept the settlement," I said after a moment. "But not the reinstatement. I think it's time for a fresh start." Thomas nodded. "I thought you might say that." As our meeting concluded, Thomas extended his hand across the table. After a moment's hesitation, I shook it. "Good luck, Adrian. Do something worthwhile with your second chance." "You too, Thomas. When you get yours..." 2 days later, I signed the settlement agreement. The funds would be more than enough to give me time to consider my next move carefully. Multiple security firms were still courting me, but I had begun to consider a different path, consulting on whistleblower protections and corporate ethics, using my experience to help others navigate similar situations. The final piece of closure came in the form of a letter from Nexus Solutions, formally retracting all allegations against me and acknowledging my role in identifying the security breach. It was accompanied by a press release that would be distributed to industry publications and news outlets. As I read the carefully worded statement clearing my name, I felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun that October morning when Thomas handed me the folder containing the security audit had come full circle. My reputation was restored. The truth had prevailed. Yet, revenge, I had discovered, was more complicated than I had imagined. It had consumed me, changed me, driven me to actions I never would have considered before. The satisfaction was real, but tempered by the knowledge of what the pursuit had cost me, and others. In the end, perhaps Thomas had been right about one thing. It had become about something bigger than either of us. A conspiracy had been exposed. Vulnerabilities had been identified and closed. National security had been protected. As for me, the future stretched out with new possibilities. My skills were still in demand. My reputation was not just restored, but enhanced. And I had learned lessons about security about human nature, about myself, that would inform whatever came next. I closed the letter, placed it carefully in a folder with the other documentation of this strange chapter in my life, and turned my attention to what lay ahead. The past was settled. Justice, however imperfect, had been served. It was time to move on. 6 months later, I was in Washington, D.C., providing testimony to a congressional committee on cybersecurity vulnerabilities in government systems. My experience had made me something of an expert witness in such matters, and my consulting firm, focused on ethical whistleblowing and security protocols, was thriving. During a break in the proceedings, I stepped outside for some air and checked my secure email. There was a message from Samantha, now working for a prestigious security firm herself, with news about former Nexus colleagues. And there was another message from a prison email address that caught me by surprise. Thought you might want to know. Thomas wrote, "Miller took a plea deal yesterday. 20 years. No possibility of parole. The full extent of his operation is still being uncovered. Your actions saved more than you know." There was no signature, no request for response, just information he thought I should have. I looked out at the Washington Monument in the distance, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here, about how the worst day of my professional life had set in motion events that led to this moment, about revenge and justice and the sometimes blurry line between them. My phone buzzed with a reminder. The committee was reconvening. Time to go back inside and continue the work of making systems more secure, more accountable, more resistant to the Thomas Vaughns and Bradford Millers of the world. I took one last deep breath of the crisp autumn air and headed back in, leaving thoughts of revenge behind me. The future, it turned out, was far more interesting.